market has gone astray. Don't get me wrong, it ain't all bad. I love the crazy fads, like England always buggering up. But you know we're gonna win the World Cup. I'm gonna start the old nation. With myself from reservation. I'm gonna start the old nation. With myself from reservation.
Keep the red flag flying here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Is it 90 this week, Paul, or 89?
89, I
It's
believe.
just 89, 90 next week. Welcome to the 89th edition of Political. It's so lovely to see everybody signing in. Thank you very much. Welcome. We've got some great topics for you tonight. But before we start, we have to be gentle with Paul. This is not a thing that we're very concerned about it, but he's fallen off his bike, and you want to laugh when you say that. That's the problem. But he's hurt himself badly. We all think he ought to go to hospital, and he's staggering on. So well done, Paul. Thank you very much indeed.
It's partially because I don't dare drive. So, I'll maybe get taken to hospital tomorrow. But yeah, I've hurt my hand a little bit. Ow. And lost a bit of skin. But these are the things, if you want to race your bike, sometimes you're going to fall off.
I suggested he wear leathers, but he said he thought that might be kinky. So so
it's bad enough in there, skin tight lycra.
We are worried about Paul tonight, and so that's our little bit of personal news. But let's move to moment of the week. The reason I do this, by the way, is because when we started doing it, Paul was always sat on the screen that way, and I was pointing at Paul. But actually, today he's like this. I don't know where he is on that fancy screen that you're all seeing. But anyway, sort of moment of the week. Let's start. Well, apart from falling off your bike, Paul, what has been the moment of your week?
I went to see a film. It wasn't the premiere, but it was the second day it had been out. It was called Manifesto. Dan Draper, who's been on the show, we did a show about it a couple of weeks ago on Socialist Night Live, and it was all about the Labour Party in the build-up to the 2019 general election in the safest Labour seat in the country. It's the safest seat in the country, in Liverpool, in Walton, and yeah, it was really interesting seeing like how different their campaign was, because I think they still had a lot of hope in the election, whereas they didn't see the writing on the wall in the same way that we did. And what was incredibly interesting in the seat that remained the safest seat in the country, they did all win, and it was Ian Byrne won and Dan Carden won in that area, and there were lots of really good activists and who were so passionate and worked incredibly hard. Like when you saw how they did that, but the interesting thing about there is that there was no mention of Brexit at all, and I think whereas in our area we felt that Brexit was the main topic for our MP at the time, when no one wanted to talk about that, and we were on such safe ground on every other topic. And Brexit was our dodgy ground. And I remember going out and campaigning about schools and having loads of support for the Labour Party. And if only we hadn't made it about Brexit. And it was interesting that it wasn't about Brexit for those people. There are bigger issues than Brexit. Brexit is about trade deals. You can make your own trade deals. You could have done whatever you wanted. I'm not saying that Brexit hasn't caused some problems. And I'm not saying it's the necessarily the worst idea in the world either. There are things that you can do, there are things that you can't do but yeah, it was just an interesting film. So yeah, well done Dan Draper as well, and all the activists there.
Paul, and one thing that strikes me, particularly coming out in our response to the RMT strike, and that is that the Tories unashamedly legislate for, appeal to, make their manifesto for their hardline basic supporters. They're absolutely, they just go straight for the jugular of the kind of slightly right-wing pensioner vote, and they go after their hardline vote. Whereas sort of the Labour Party seems to go after some kind of mythical middle ground and alienate their hardcore support. It's a completely different approach.
It's interesting because there's this, as you say, there's the chase around for the mythical centre ground, but actually I think what it is the status quo. It's not the middle ground, it's the status quo, and people want change, and people can offer change. So what you have is you always have the right wing offering a change, more power for rich people or whatever, or they'll tie it up, or they'll talk about migrants, or they'll do something and say, we're going to change this, your lives will be better. Because if your position is, I am a centrist, the establishment is doing well, everything is working out very well for me personally, let's keep things going. Yeah, don't rock the boat. That is not going to appeal to people who want lives to change. And I think that's why they talk about the horseshoe effect, where the left and right meet. Actually, it's just because there's no left offer, because most people agree with the nationalisation of things and all those things. I'm going on quite a lot from a moment of the week here, but most people agree with a lot of left-wing policies and don't necessarily agree with the right, but will vote for change if given the only option of change would be right-wing.
We need to give people a reason to vote Labour, and we need to listen to what our supporters are asking for. Stuart, moment of your week.
Mine has to be, there was an interview with a taxi driver held outside of a railway station by one of the dog whistle news outlets. I won't name them because they're awful. And the expectation of the interviewer was that he was going to get an angry taxi driver who's lost money, who's angry at the strikers, taking away his income, costing him money. And it quickly turned around where the taxi driver was 100% behind the strikers. They have every right to be defending their pay and their conditions and seeking to make sure that their jobs are secure from redundancy. And he said that we're built strong, or something along those lines, in the area. And there was just absolute solidarity from people who were facing some of the pressures of a strike. And it just shows you that the reality of it is that most people, I think, are on the side of the rail workers, having decent wages, having security, having the right and the decency of pay increasing in terms in line with inflation, so that they can fight the cost of living crisis.
There was an issue on Facebook about a woman on the news who was getting cross with the strike because she didn't want to go on the bus because she didn't get as much help on the bus. She was disabled and she didn't get as much help on the bus as she did on the trains, completely missing the point that what they're striking for is to maintain that level of help for her. Bonkaroonies. You did something else rather wonderfully, though, last weekend, didn't you? What tell everybody about that? So
on Saturday, myself and other colleagues from Socialist Think Tank, we were down in London, and we were marching with the We Demand Better rally. We marched through London. We made some demands, some incredible speakers, thousands upon thousands of people there, showing solidarity, making their demand for a better future. And there were some standout children who gave Boris Johnson and Number 10 the middle finger, which I think will be a lasting memory.
Brilliant. Well done, and thank you. It needed that rally. Just looking into the people's moments of the week. Neil Terry was with Amal, who is that big, large-scale puppet sort of migrant. Well, going round, changing people's attitudes. Well done, Neil. And a lot of love for Sam Townsend as well, who's put herself forward, standing to become the Bishop Auckland candidate, the Labour Party, but also for being out on the RMT picketing Darlington. Sam is one of ours, and we wish her all absolutely well. Finally, Jane, moment of your week.
So when we did the show last week, we just learned just before the end of the show that they'd managed to stop that flight going out to Rwanda, or they'd managed to stop all the people being on the plane, which was fantastic. But then, and then a few days when they were talking about it afterwards, there'd been talk of the government wanting to take us out of the European Court of Human Rights because they blocked some of the people being on that plane, which just made me really sad. And I was reading that there's only 2 other countries that have ever left the European Court of Human Rights voluntarily. So temporarily Greece after a military coup decades ago, and Russia after invading the Ukraine a few months ago. So that's the company we'll be keeping in order to, I'm sure Putin thinks what he's doing is necessary too.
we're just about to talk about that, and I'm going to be asking you about that very issue, Jane. Spot on. Thank you, Moments of the Week. Mia has been selected to write an article about her lived experience in the British Journal for Social Work. Well done, congratulations, we're delighted. Sock it to them, Mia. And Mark was at the march as well. Thank you so much, everybody. But if I can persuade Paul to fight through the pain.
Now it's time for the big story.
And the big story, of course, is that Lord Geidt has resigned. And you might well think it's maybe a minor issue that the ethical advisor of the Prime Minister has resigned. But I assure you, it most certainly is not. Paul, why? Why has he resigned?
He hasn't resigned for the obvious reasons. There's so many reasons you could resign because of the ethics of the UK Prime Minister. He's an interesting character ethically, is Boris Johnson. You know, we all know that he was sacked for lying from 2 different jobs. One of them a government job, one of them a journalist job. Most people are aware of his previous boss who sacked him for lying, who said that Boris Johnson actually doesn't really believe that there is such a thing as truth. So therefore he can't lie. So he can say whatever he wants, and you know, and that is just like the truth is a subjective thing. So therefore, there's no point telling it. Is Boris Johnson's issue, and yeah, so. These things like the Downing Street lockdown parties where he pretended that he didn't know anything about them, then all of a sudden he did know about them but didn't really realise it was a party because it was only wine and cheese and knocking about together and loads of people in a room, and all the things that they said that we couldn't do that he was doing. So yeah, I think that was very testing for Lord Geidt, but yeah, it's ended up being a trading issue. And John, can you fill me in the details of the trading issue, because I'm not quite sure on what it actually was.
Because basically what it is that Lord Geidt and he's from the palace, and so what he said was, I was pushed to the limit by your stance on explaining why you'd behaved like you did during Partygate, and to the point where I almost had to resign. But as you know, what we've been talking about recently unspecified, has caused me. I cannot do anything now but resign. So then what happened is that Boris wrote back to him and said, what are you talking about, these steel tariff things? I just asked you what you thought about them. I wasn't telling you how I was going to behave. And people are saying that Geiter brilliantly caused Johnson to spill the beans about why he was resigning. It was over steel tariffs. My question to you is do you not think Geiter's cocked up? Because basically the issue is the government were talking about continuing high tariffs on Chinese steel. The worry being that if they follow WTO rules and abolish those tariffs, then cheap Chinese steel will flood our market. And so that the government has been talking about maintaining those tariffs essentially illegally. And people are saying, what's a silly thing to resign over? Because large numbers of the people in the country are going to say, well, I agree with that, to continue that. I agree with that. And so I was going to ask you, I mean, has he cocked up his resignation, given that he had so much to resign about validly?
Yeah, for me, yes, because what he's resigned about is protectionism. And the interesting thing is, like in the capitalist world that we live in, protectionism is meant to be this entirely awful thing. And I know we like to explain things properly here. Protectionism is simply where a government decides that rather than rely on the so-called free market, that they will look at their own market and their own people and start to make business decisions based upon what's best for the people. So if your industry is struggling, rather than import a load of things and see like, let's say your steelworks is going to shut, you put in a lot of money into those steelworks to make sure they keep going, because you think it's better to keep those jobs open until such a time as the market is not flooded with very cheap Chinese steel. So you actually are protecting people. Now, the interesting thing about capitalism is it worked at its best with a lot of protectionism. If you look at historically the way infant industries have been protected by capitalism, it's been like places like Japan, for example, when they weren't great at manufacturing, they used protectionism. They used their own systems and said, right, okay, we are going to make sure that foreign cars, for example, are very expensive to us, so we get better at building cars. And now, as we know, the Japanese are incredibly brilliant at building cars. Or, if you go back far enough, the British did it. The USA have done it. Everyone's done it. And protectionism is a necessary part of growing an economy, but it doesn't like if your economy's poor, but it doesn't help big business, and it doesn't help this so-called like free market ideology. So I'm getting into an ideological rant here, but it seems to be that he believes so strongly in free market economics, which actually is a nonsense, because there's no such thing as a free market. Because there are borders, there are workers that can't pass borders and so on. That's not a free market. But because he believes so much in this modern neoliberal ideology around free markets, he's decided to resign over that rather than resign over the fact that his boss has been lying about X, Y, and Z and all these different things.
Is not the truth, Paul, that he's just failed? He's been made an utter monkey of. He was completely out of his depth with the master of deceit, trying to be a decent ethics advisor when he was looking after the master of deceit, and basically after that roasting he got from the parliamentary select committee, he's just decided it was time to run for the hills. Is this man somebody we ought to just dismiss as a failure?
I don't like to really focus on individuals, to be honest. I like to focus on systems. So the system's flawed because someone, it doesn't matter. He might have been brilliant at it. He might have been terrible at it. It's the system that I'm interested in. We always focus on individuals and whether an individual gets it right or wrong. Our system should allow for the fact that if we've got an unethical prime minister, there should be something in place that will stop the vast excesses. And, you know, some people would cite Donald Trump as an example here. Like, some people were saying, oh, well, if Donald Trump ever wanted to nuke a nation, actually there are checks and balances in place that won't happen. People said that at the time. I'm not sure whether we've got those checks and balances in place in this country for someone who is such a liar as Boris Johnson. This person, Lord Geidt, was supposed to be sort of a bit of a check and a balance, but he's proved himself that, you know, however good he was, however capable he was of doing that job, the system is not strong enough. So he might have been the best person in the world at his job. It doesn't matter. It's the system that matters.
I think that's spot on comment, Paul, and we'll be coming to that later in the discussion as I speak to Stuart. I'm going to do a lot of reading now. Jane, this is the Guardian editorial. Boris Johnson is a dangerous leader who thinks that rules do not apply to him and that ethical standards are for the birds. Mr. Johnson is a serial rule breaker and an ethical vacuum. He trashes the conventions of democratic public life. Parliamentarians and officials need to end the damage that the Prime Minister is doing to our politics, our democracy, and our country. Now, this is coming, Jane. This is the editorial of a mainstream and not very left-wing newspaper. Now, I got two questions. First of all, do you agree with that? How right or wrong is that? But secondly, for me, what does it come to when our major newspapers are saying things like that about our Prime Minister? What have you got to say about that as well?
I do think they're absolutely right. I'm glad to hear them calling it out in very clear terms. What does it say about our democracy that we voted in this man with this well-known record for dishonesty and illegally proroguing Parliament? The way he treated Theresa May, you know, he didn't have the bravery to stand up and be a candidate, to lead the party, to be the leader who negotiated that deal. He dropped out and waited in the background, letting a woman take the fall for it, and then toppled her deal at the last minute, claiming he had another ready deal, and then botched together some sort of no deal disaster, which we're all paying for. There's not a week that goes by without another scandal. I think the latest one just in the last few days is that he tried to give his then girlfriend a £100,000 job, very senior in our government during the pandemic, and prior to that as well, when she was his girlfriend, at our expense. He doesn't seem to take anything seriously, and I think he's extremely dangerous. I was saying, can you remember you were talking about coming out of the court, and Gabby Hinscliffe says much the same thing. It's a genuinely thuggish edge to this government, with its arrogant refusal to accept scrutiny of its increasingly out of control behaviour. And its answer to everything is sort of, we're just going to continue and keep on doing what we want to do. What Paul poses the question, sort of, what system can stop that kind of thing happening? Our system's obviously not robust enough. Certainly not a parliamentary system that relies upon people to set their own rules and then has no independent body to hold them accountable or do anything about it when they break them, and allows them to change them as they, break them, change them, face no consequences. That's not a system fit for purpose.
Stuart, same question to you. What can we do to stop this man?
a codified system that has some accountability should be like a priority for any government coming in. We can't rely on this, old-fashioned good old chaps, we're all nice people. We can't call anyone a liar system. People are genuine. Boris Johnson's a liar, and members of parliament can't call him a liar to his face. You have to call him the right honourable. They have to come up with, actual lies to talk to him in Parliament. That's how iffy this system is, and the entire system is one that's centered around self-interest. Like Lord Guy, he's waiting on a seat in the House of Lords, isn't he? So any time spent with Boris Johnson that kind of diminishes and erodes away, his credibility with regards to doing the job, is a loss for him. He wants to go into the House of Lords, I would imagine, at some point in the future, and be able to be, held up as responsible and, completely distant and separate from the horror show of politics that is Boris Johnson and the decisions that are going on. And the public opinion might be that in the future, he was the one that Boris Johnson went to and said, look, can I get away with this? And even though we might not know the conversations that went on, because the policies took place or didn't, we will know what he had said, even though he appears to be a very quiet and behind closed doors kind of man.
I mean, I know that Paul doesn't like us talking about individuals, but this ethics advisor that we're all getting upset for, he is the chair of Schroders, an asset management company. He's the chair of King's College London, and he's an advisor to BAE. Now, that's the armaments and aerospace company. And he's holding those posts, like so many of these MPs do, at the same time as he's advising the Prime Minister about his ethics, the Prime Minister's ethics. And he's got interests.
That's what I meant, though. Like, that is a systemic problem. The fact that he is allowed to do that, the fact that this guy's allowed to do that. You can look at what happened for years and years as well. Who gets promoted to the House of Lords? Like, you look at Ian Austin writing letters to everyone saying to support the Conservative Party after sitting as a Labour MP and then becoming a Lord. You can look at all the people they've knighted over the years, like Jimmy Savile, for example. There are huge systemic problems. This is not democratic. This is a very, very weird system, and we're very subservient to it in this country. We seem not to question it anywhere near enough. We just seem to accept our lot in life and not challenge these gross misjudgments and these gross misconduct. And John, you mentioned BAE Systems. Like, what is going on there? They are advising, oh yes, you need to invest in a lot of weapons. The weapons manufacturing industry is huge. What good is that doing the world at the moment? How many just wars are there going on at the moment? Because they are selling a lot of weapons, they are killing a lot of people, and how many in the world? How much of that is going to just causes? Like, we're in, again, as I say, it's all a systemic problem, and that system is clearly capitalism, a neoliberal capitalist society.
Thank you. My apologies to everybody. My computer just froze. I missed most of what you said there, Paul. But thank you very much for that comment. Jane, there's a new book by a guy called Gideon Rachman, The Age of the Strong Man, and it's a study of various of what's happening to governments nowadays, and it describes Donald Trump, Erdogan, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and Boris Johnson in England. I mean, do you really think it's that we're being taken over by a Putin style of government, which focuses on the individual strongman? And there's no doubt about it that people worship him.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could say that. I think we're being ruled by very selfish, entitled people born into privilege, who've made great use of that, who don't seem to have any principles, who honestly don't seem to care if the people that they're supposed to be looking after die or live in terrible poverty or go through awful things. And that's yeah. So I think it's a fair assessment, as horrible as it sounds. Yes.
Stuart, are we simply losing our control of our democracy to elitists and bullies? I mean, is this our fault? Are we losing control of our democracy?
I don't think that it's our fault, but I do think that we need to build, real bids for power if we want to take back control of our democracy. Because right now we have such, as a working class group, we have such limited access to Westminster politics, and it's designed that way intentionally to keep us out. That the efforts that me, Paul, Jane, yourself would have to go through to get into Westminster, it's like climbing Everest compared to what somebody with the right connections, the right friends, went to the right school will have. For them, it's a very different game.
One last thing. Mick Hills suggests that we need a change in the voting system. Gabby Hinscliffe says it's down to the cabinet. The cabinet need to rein him in. I don't think we'll get much joy there. One last question. When you talk to lots of people, Stuart, they would say this just doesn't matter. We know that politicians are liars. What does it matter if Boris Johnson tells lies? We knew that anyway. He's doing a good job. I mean, how would you answer that?
I keep reminding people that, if this was somebody down the street from them, it would taken something away from them out of their garden, gone in, got something out the garden, and then said, "Oh, I did a great job saving that lawnmower from getting wet in your garden." These are things that you wouldn't allow to go on in day-to-day life. You should expect better from politics in general. Don't stop dreaming that honest people can get there, because they can. And we just need to keep, the reality, it's not a fantasy for people to be honest and trustworthy and want to do the right thing. We just need to keep fighting to make sure that we get them there.
Thank you. Can somebody ban Token View 4 GWT, please? Jacqueline Hemmings makes a smashing point that individual strongman governments seem to be a bit of a disaster, and what a contrast we have when we have female leaders like Jacinda Ardern. And the people in Finland, is it Finland, who has an entire government of women. God bless them and well done. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Smashing comments, and thank you, listeners, for your comments as well. But I'm going to move on. I'm going to start by, like I often do on these things, I'm going to say that I ask the questions doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with the questions I'm asking, okay? But people need to be, these questions need to be put. The second one that you wanted to talk about was the extradition of Julian Assange. And first, Priti Patel has agreed that the British government will not get in the way of extraditing him to the US. And the first question is she not correct in this, Jane?
She's absolutely not correct in this. Julian Assange is being put on these espionage charges because he released state secrets, which were human rights abuses, including murder and torture, mass murder in some cases, by wealthy governments, including the US government. And I don't understand why it's okay to send him over to America to face those espionage charges and 175 years in prison. which will end his life.
Well, the reason it's okay, it would be argued, is that we have an extradition agreement with the US that they asked to extradite him to face criminal charges, which absolutely proper course of law. We queried that and refused because we had significant worries about how fair a trial it would be, how he would be treated, where he would be kept, that the trial would be a setup. We therefore asked for a whole suite of assurances on his behalf. The US government has promised those assurances. So legally, surely we don't have a leg to stand on now. Surely we may not believe them, but surely we don't have the grounds on which to resist extradition any further.
So it's funny because this government seems quite keen to break international law when it comes to steel tariffs or mistreating refugees, but this is obviously a red line for them. And what I'd say too is that legal and moral aren't always the same thing. What happened in Hitler's Germany was legal. It didn't make it okay to do those things. And I would also say that extradition treaty doesn't go both ways equally. So we would be expected to extradite someone to the US if they ask us to. If we wanted them to extradite someone here, then we would have to prove, or on the balance of probability, that that person was guilty of the crime. The criteria aren't the same. So maybe we need to look at that if we're taking back control.
As came out very strongly, by the way, when that woman knocked down killed that on the road, ran into that chappie on the road and killed him, and then fled to the US. And can we get her back? Can we? Helen's like get her back. I mean, I'm going to keep challenging you a little bit more here on this. I mean, you know my theory about whistleblowers, that what they do is they blow the whistle. And then but they don't want to suffer any of the consequences. And there are consequences when you blow the whistle. Nobody wants to employ you anymore. Lots of people saying nasty things about you. If you've broken agreements, you get into trouble for the agreements that you've broken. So, for instance, if you work for GCHQ and you leak something to the press, you get into trouble because you've broken your promise not to betray government secrets. So is this not just another case of whistleblower syndrome, that he leaked all those documents, he published all those documents, he did that knowing it would cause a storm, and is he not now just trying to wriggle out of the consequences of that?
So if I knew that someone had committed a murder or a mass murder and I didn't say anything, I would be charged as a criminal for that. I don't understand why, because he's a journalist, letting people know about that makes him a criminal. I would have thought he's done a sort of public service. And when you actually look at the things that he has released, there's a really good thread on Twitter. It's from the end of April, but it's at Mariam_Zakarian. It's really chilling, just a list of what he revealed, the terrible, terrible things that governments have done that he revealed. And when we talk about whistleblowers, I believe it's 32 CIA whistleblowers who've said that the CIA attempted or plotted to kill Julian Assange a few years ago. And it was only a week before Priti Patel signed off on that a Spanish court issued a summons for the former CIA director Mike Pompeo to come and answer in court about the CIA plot on Julian Assange's life.
I mean, the other point is that he wasn't the whistleblower. It was a trick question. He merely published it. One last question. This is a political issue, isn't it? Assange's case is making it about politics, not about law. If it's just strictly about law, then he just goes to court and proves that he was innocent. But there's political issues here Now, how, to what degree do you agree with that statement? And sort of, what should the balance be between politics and law in the decisions that the government is making?
I think he's definitely a political prisoner, and I think it is a political issue rather than a legal issue. I think that we should do the right thing, and this would be, if we're going to challenge international law of any kind, then this would be the one for me to challenge, because we've got a real moral grounds to not do this. This man's dying in prison. After Priti Patel's decision, his wife, Stella Morris, put out a message on social media saying that after the announcement, Julian was strip searched and moved to a bare cell for his own protection and had no visitors over the weekend. So you think about this man, mass murder was committed and covered up. Those victims and their families and loved ones they have seen no justice, will see no justice. It wouldn't have even been released to the world if Julian Assange hadn't, as a journalist, released that information that had been given to him by whistleblowers. He's being strip searched and taken away from his family and left to die in a prison cell as a punishment for this. And if you want to challenge something, this is something to challenge.
Your answers are always fantastic, Jane. Thank you so very much indeed. Spot on. Stuart, an awful lot of people are relating this as a press issue about the freedom of the press. They're describing him as a journalist. Lucas, Caroline Lucas, the MP, the US authorities attempted to silence him because they don't like what he revealed. John Simpson said it would be a terrible precedent. I mean, do you think that this is all about trying to stop the press doing its proper job in exposing corruption and wrongdoing?
I think that it would send shockwaves through the entire, press network. Certainly, no journalist is going to want to get into the same position. It's a death sentence, for want of a better word, and it will change how those journalists behave, how they act, the risks and the investigations that they might take on. I think it will also change whistleblowing in general. The fact that we are reliant at times on whistleblowers, kind of coming out with the information, and be it child abuse in care, or somebody spitting in your food, right, at a local McDonald's. Sometimes it's very simple stuff, and it takes somebody with a bit of guts to come out. But if there's a whole culture shift away from whistleblowing and the protections around the journalism attached to that, we might find that more injustices go on, more crimes go on, unchallenged. The world will be a worse place because of it.
I mean, I just think you're so right, Stuart, with that. I mean, at one time, what we were trying to set up systems within organizations so they self-monitored. So the NHS and schools had systems to stop bad things happening so they could monitor themselves. And sort of so much now, particularly to do with government, you never expect that the police as well, you never expect them to dob themselves in, to criticize themselves. And so you get to rely on whistleblowers, and no, we're going to slaughter the whistleblowers as well. And where is the accountability? Ultimately, where does the accountability? And it's all part of losing control of our own democracy, like we were talking about earlier. One last question for you, Stuart. Jonathan Pilger, the journalist, says that this case is about the rottenness of British justice. Now, that's an interesting statement. Do you agree with that this case demonstrates how rotten British justice is?
Perhaps not British justice, but, justice in general. There's lots of, expectations of what justice means to people. But the real reality is that it's often denied from people. Real justice is denied to a lot of people based on, income, location, all sorts of different metrics. And, you know, the justice for Julian is one of those things. Is he part of a political game that's going on? Is it part of, two nations that have an imbalance in their justice systems? It's a very, how should I say, it's one that we need to dig into. We need to really define what justice means to the people in Britain. And I think if you were to ask them what justice was to them, they would likely find themselves on the side of Julian.
I think you're spot on. I think that the case reaps up a whole lot of issues. John Simpsons is right. It's a precedent for a whole load of different things. Some smashing comments on the comment stream. Thank you so much. Mick Hills thinks that the appeal is very strong case, and we hope so. Jacqueline Hemmings, I can't see how the government can justify the treatment of Julian Assange in Belmarsh prison. No, neither do I. I think it's an amazing thing that sort of the person who was the whistleblower is walking free in America, and we're treating the man who simply published that stuff in the way we are in prison. The US have actually promised that they won't give the death penalty, but people are still talking about it. Mia Mantri, it's amazing what they argue is for someone's own protection. How is the way they're treating him for his own protection? Neil Terry, we knight war criminals and imprison journalists. Fantastic. Mark Longley talks about the deep evils within American society. Jake Ratcliffe, it's incredibly ironic when the right bang on about culture wars, freedom and speech, and being cancelled when things like this are going on. That sort of various comments after that. Finally, just quickly on this one, Paul, Australia is getting involved, aren't they? They're saying he can be imprisoned in Australia if he wants. Do you know why? the Prime Minister of Australia is getting so involved, and
he's Australian, isn't he? He's Australian. I don't understand why the USA think they can prosecute a foreign journalist anyway. Like, perhaps Australia are doing something where they think, well, he's one of our own. Maybe the only way we could save him from this foreign state that are trying to, like, imagine, let's say, for example, this was Iran, and Iran had decided that they needed to have a journalist who had printed some stories about what they were doing, and they needed him to be extradited to there. Imagine if it was that. So maybe Australia are popping along and saying, well, maybe we can save this guy's life, because it doesn't appear that he is safe to go to the USA, given that the USA plotted to kill him while he was in the embassy.
Be, Paul, it would be, everybody would save face if they just said we're going to allow Australia to sort it out. I'm going to move on, people. Thank you very much, listeners. We could talk about that for a lot longer, I'm quite sure. But I just want to talk about the proposal to electronically tag some asylum seekers. Immediately the failure of the Rwanda plane, up they come with this idea. Stuart, tell us all about this and what you think about it.
So the plan from the Home Office is to electronically tag asylum seekers, or at least some of them, who have entered the country because they fear that they might abscond. There's no evidence that asylum seekers do that. They really, don't have a place to go. They don't have the ways and means to abscond once they get here. They are, quite reliant on the support that they receive. Now, there was an interesting article in the Guardian, and it kind of showed that maybe the purpose of this isn't to actually, detain or keep control of these asylum seekers, but in reality, It was about creating division amongst the people of Britain as a means to divide us up and shuffle us into little boxes with hopes that there's a general election around the corner. We know that, you know, the left is often portrayed as, you know, a living protest, that we're just a protest culture. And when these awful things happen, we protest and we fight against them. And that's exactly the outcome that Priti Patel and her cohort are looking to achieve. They want this in the news, that we are trying to take away their efforts. We're going to take away their root out of this issue without us actually providing a fix for the issue. We don't get an opportunity to speak on what is the root cause. All the media will be centered around us sitting across motorways, or, you know, being chained to gates as a protest culture. So what we need to change the whole narrative around this, and we actually need to, you know, build the idea that, you know, the reason that people are coming across over on boats is because technology changed and we stopped them coming over on the top of trains and inside of lorries when we started scanning them. And we need to then, you know, get the idea that the reason that they were coming over illegally was because we shut down so many legal routes. We need to be able to get that into the media, you know, and be more than just seen as a protest. All they want is that us as a reaction. So that at the time of a general election, we were seen as, you know, opposing their plan to tackle an issue.
Others, yes. There was a joke on the radio where they were saying that people were criticising Priti Patel for wanting to send them to Rwanda, and on she came, and she says, no, I think Rwanda's far too soft. I want to send them to Mordor, she said. And it was, sort of, you get this thing that you're absolutely right, that the Tories, in fact, are openly proposing the most horrible and objectionable ways that they possibly can to win an election.
It's sad that, you know, people generally want to do the right thing, and we know that we are going to respond to this. That, you know, it's the reason that flight didn't take off, because, you know, lefty lawyers, you know, fought for justice. But the real core behind this, they don't need this to succeed. They just need somebody to oppose it.
Thank you. Jane, the Kinnock has said that it's yet another desperate attempt to distract public opinion from the failure of the government's asylum decisions, asylum system. Do you think that the response of the Labour Party has been anywhere near strong enough?
It depends on what you mean by the Labour Party. So I'd say from the Labour leadership, certainly not, but there were some very good Labour MPs and members and councillors who have come out and in no unclear terms, you know, said that this is completely unacceptable, this shouldn't be happening, and that if, you know, it wouldn't be happening under Labour if they had a choice about it.
Thank you. Some lovely comments. Just show what lovely people our listeners are. Jacqueline Hemmings, treating people seeking refuge and asylum like criminals is disgraceful. Just vindictiveness. Milk the Cow podcast, tagging asylum seekers is vile. Mick Hills, they should electronically tag Boris Johnson. I think I'd suggest other things they could do electronically to him. Neil Terry suggests that it's revenge. I think there's a fair comment there. They had it up their sleeve. Neil Terry, around 100 asylum seekers abscond every year. Tiny numbers. And as Stuart pointed out, Neil, the fact is that once they abscond, they give up their support. It makes no sense. Ruth Davison, you've got to be careful about your Nazi illusions here, but she says that tagging them is similar to forcing people to wear a star, and that is the worry. That is, it's a very, very fierce comment, is that. Thank you for it. Mark Lumley, on Twitter, I was shocked by how many white British people believe they'll be killed if white people become a minority. That's xenophobia at its most fierce. And here we go, Jacqueline Hemmings. It's funny, isn't it? When 150,000 people die in the pandemic, it's only a small percentage. But 100 refugees on the run, and it's a huge number and a huge problem. God bless you for all your comments. Paul, we are running out of time. Do you just want to make a comment about electronic tagging before we shut up the show?
It's just, it's an appalling policy, but it isn't a new one. It has been thought about and considered before, and some people consider it to be okay in certain circumstances and stuff like that. I don't think we should treat people as prisoners. It's not a good thing to do, especially when people haven't done anything wrong. All you've done is you've come to seek asylum, which is perfectly legal through international law. We've gone a long way down a rabbit hole when we're othering people to that extent, and it's an incredibly worrying time.
I agree. We signed a convention in 1951 which said that we would treat them with respect, that we would give them access to the means of living, and that we would give them freedom of movement. Freedom of movement. And we just completely breaking that.
It's interesting how recent borders actually are for the purposes of work as well. It's not, in human history, it is not a normal thing to have borders that would limit your access to work. It's all they're used for, isn't it? Capital moves over borders all the time. It's only your rights to be able to work in another country that are that seem to be controlled by borders.
Thank you very much, Paul. Spot on. I'm going to give Mick Hills the final word. Tories playing to their racist base. Don't know whether I agree, but certainly think on it. God bless. Right, I'm going to bring the show to an end. Bang on time. Paul, you've been an absolute star. Thank you very much indeed. Sort of applause all around. Everybody's applauding you for being so brave and seeing the show through to its end. We'll let you get away. Goodbye, Jane.
Bye.
Oh, you've been fabulous. Thank you for your comment. Stuart, you are the star as always. The listener base loves you, Stuart. We all know that you're the favourites. And Paul, thank you so much, boss. I know you hate me calling you the boss, but you are. Do you want to finish by sort of talking us out and pressing the goodbye?
Yeah, I love that Neil Terry's just said, brilliant show all, big hand to Paul, and I do have one big hand. Just tickled me. So yeah, one hand's quite swollen. Thank you so much, everyone. This show's nothing without people getting involved. So thank you so much for all the comments tonight. Thank you for being members of Socials Think Tank. Thank you for sharing our stuff. Thank you for liking it. Thank you for trying to spread the word. It is incredibly important that we do so. We are not going to change any opinions by having a centrist policy that keeps everything the same. We do not want the status quo. Change is necessary, and we need these positive visions for left-wing change. That these need to become mainstream ideas, because I truly believe that decent people, and most people are incredibly decent, will have nothing to fear and will absolutely agree with the policies that we put forward as a left. So do it, spread the word. Don't be ashamed of having left-wing views. go out there and be proud of what you believe in, and proud of the fact that you want to make a change in the world, a positive change in the world.
Well done. And get yourself an A&E, says Tim Dredge.
Yeah, maybe tomorrow when we've got the kids looked after. So see everyone
everybody.
soon. Thanks again,
God
everyone.
bless you. Thank you.
We'll keep the red flag flying here.